This video is brought to you by BetUS Sportsbook and Casino.
As we get closer to the 2024 NHL Draft, we're starting to finally get news on what teams are thinking with the draft just a month away. And the Montreal Canadiens are no different. We're starting to get a lot of news, though, surrounding their 5th overall pick, and also not just who they could draft, but what they could do with it, potentially trading it in the end. So what could happen with that 5th overall pick, and what could the Habs be doing on draft day? Well, make sure you watch till the end for all the rumors and all the news, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this all throughout the year and all throughout draft season. Now today we're going to be covering this article from the Forward Period, talking about which D can move, draft activity, and who they may target. There's a lot of good info in this article that we need to talk about here. But first I want to talk about today's sponsor, BetUS, for a second here. With the conference finals, the World Championships, it's a great time to get started with BetUS today, and right now you can go for the series prizes if you're feeling anyone specifically. You can also go on the World Championships every day with all the games going on. You can go through any single team and go on them, bet on them to win. You can also go through the Conn Smythe winners right now. This is going to be a really interesting race as we get it down to it. Right now, Connor McDavid, Igor Shesterkin with the best odds so far. Shesterkin could be a pretty good one there. And then you also just have the series. You can go through really many of them. There's the Florida and Rangers series right now that has a lot of the odds here. You can go through most goals, you can go through most points, a series outcome, going through the games. There's so many options there. I'm actually going to go Alexander Barkov for the most points in this series. He was incredible versus Boston, putting $10 down to win 55, but no matter what, that Rangers-Panthers series is going to be nutty. So make sure you guys sign up to BetUS today with the description link, and every little bit helps. It also helps a lot having the channel sponsors here to make more videos for you guys, so every bit is appreciated. And thank you to BetUS for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get into the article here with a lot of good info on the Habs and really other teams on what could happen around the draft, what trades we could potentially see, and what activity the Montreal Canadiens might make. Now, interestingly, it starts off by talking about Nick Suzuki being the top center in Montreal and how that won't change anytime soon, thank goodness. But it's interesting that surrounding the topic of the Canadiens, some wonder where they could go this summer after acquiring 2 centermen ahead of each of the last NHL drafts. They mention how with the deep prospect pool the Habs have and also how many defensive prospects they have, will that come in the form of another center or a top 6 winger? And here's where we get into it. Some teams are being told by Hughes that the Canadiens are not in the market for help up the middle. The message appears to be that Kirby Dach will be given the opportunity to own the team's second line center spot next season, while Alex Newhook may either move to the wing or take the third line center spot. Now personally, I really do appreciate this. I think having the confidence in the players you've already acquired is important, especially in Dach's case, where I think if he was healthy, we wouldn't be having any discussions about them trading for a center. Obviously, I don't know if that'll impact the actual drafting of a centerman. I don't think that will in the end, but I do think having Dach solidified as a second line center next year should be the plan. Unless there's another freak injury there, I think he will be an important piece of the Habs roster next season and maybe one of their best players on the entire roster. To me, he can have that improvement. He can play up to that level, and I thought he was going to this last season before, again, that freak injury happened, which set him back yet again. But you also have an Alex Newhook's case, a player that could rise up in the lineup if he needs to. In the case of Kirby Dach's injury at points, he was playing center as the second line guy behind Suzuki, and I thought was doing a pretty good job at that. Alex Newhook also had some of his own health issues, only playing 55 games last year, but got 15 goals, 19 assists for 34 points, and was really playing well in that second half, and especially as Montreal's second line center in the second half in the wake of Kirby Dach's injury, he was a pretty good role player there and did his job correctly. There were some defensive inconsistencies, but the guy's 23 years old. That's to be expected. You also look at the face-off stats from March 1st onward, and he wasn't too bad. In 276 draws, he won 49.6% of them, which for a 23-year-old is quite solid. You're never going to really expect those younger guys to be all too complete at that age, but to already be hovering around even, especially when he hadn't played center throughout some parts in Colorado either, I think is still pretty solid and shows he could be a center if you need him to be. Now, they do go on to say other teams aren't buying the mindset that the Habs might not be shopping for a center and seem to think a lot of Montreal's decisions this summer will be determined around or during the NHL draft, especially if Cayden Lindstrom is or isn't available at number 5. And it seems like this could really determine a lot for the future. It seems like if Montreal doesn't get Lindstrom, if they have to take a D-man or they trade down or get an Iginla or something like that, that they might be in the market for another centerman, but I just don't really see the reason for that. Unless you are concerned about Kirby Dach's health long term, I don't think there's really a reason to go after a top 6 center right now. I think Kirby Dach can be that, and especially in a second line center role, if healthy, be good enough in that role. I also don't think Montreal's in a position where they need to spend all these assets to get somebody like that, especially if you have a potential in Kirby Dach being good enough in that role. Unless something crazy comes up where there's somebody you can't afford to lose, especially for a great price, I just don't really see the reasoning for Montreal to put so much effort into that. To me, I think they need more depth on the wings. They need more reinforcements on that. And to me, it's a much bigger need than center is right now, especially if Dach and Newhook are healthy. Suzuki, Dach, and Newhook is going to be great for the current present. And that's not even talking about if they draft Cayden Lindstrom for the long term. If they do, then the center situation is more than fine. And it's pretty perfect, honestly. Now, we also start to get some really good draft info on what the Habs might be looking for, what they could be going for in this draft, and talk about how Lindstrom and all the guys on the North American side, and Celebrini, Lindstrom, and Levshunov, and also on the international side, how Silayev, Demidov, and Helenius are right there in the top 3. But then we get into this important sentence here saying, there's growing belief Lindstrom is high on Montreal's draft board, but if he's not available at the 5th overall slot, Kent Hughes could move the pick. Now, I saw some people saying that because Demidov wasn't mentioned here that he isn't a factor for Montreal. I disagree. I think it could absolutely be a situation where maybe he's second on their board and Lindstrom is third, perhaps. I don't think that's all too unrealistic. And I don't think Demidov was mentioned just because he was talking about the center situation. He was talking about what the future could be there. And of course, Cayden Lindstrom could absolutely fit in that role. And to me, if they're looking for a center of the future, if they're looking for a top 6 guy, Lindstrom behind Celebrini is absolutely the best choice, especially in terms of what Montreal needs, having more of a power forward, especially up the lineup, somebody that can bring so much skill and skating and physicality. Lindstrom checks those boxes incredibly well for the Habs and gives them a bigger dynamic that they don't have a lot in that prospect pool. We talked about it in that video a couple weeks back, but to me, I think Lindstrom and Demidov is a toss-up for Montreal. To me, especially considering what Lindstrom can bring and the difference that he can bring in the lineup. To me, I think for Montreal, that is especially important, especially what they've drafted recently in Slavkovsky, in Reinbacher. They've tried to go for anomalies. They've tried to go for these rare archetypes, and Lindstrom is absolutely that. Really, the only player that we've seen kind of up that alley recently is Quinton Byfield, really over the last 5 years. Lindstrom is similar to that, but even more skillful, I would say, more driven in that offensive side. And here's the thing, if Lindstrom is maybe drafted 4th overall and Chicago and Anaheim go for a D, I think Demidov would still be the pick for Montreal. I think they would still go for best player available, which I think in their case is absolutely Demidov. But there might be an interesting situation where somehow, some way, all of Chicago, Anaheim, and Columbus take D, and maybe Demidov and Lindstrom are right there. If both of them are available, it's kind of going to be interesting to see who they actually end up taking. In terms of BPA, I think it is Demidov, but I think there is a chance with how much we've heard about how Montreal loves Lindstrom, that they could end up going for him at 5th overall, which even though I prefer Demidov, I don't blame them for going for Lindstrom. This guy could be absolutely sick for them. And again, exactly the type of force physically they could use on top of the skill and on top of the skating. And of course, there's even the situation where none of them are on the board. And that's how I think it currently shapes up right now. But we'll have to wait and see. It really all depends on Chicago, because if they go for D, the whole draft will be shaken up, and Montreal would absolutely have a chance in either Demidov or Lindstrom, which to me is the best case scenario. We get some more interesting info on just general NHL teams in the top 12, saying it's premature to determine what direction any team in the top 12 wants to go, considering the conference finals don't get underway until Wednesday, but it will be interesting to see what certain clubs, like the Canadiens, do with their selection, mentioning Utah, Ottawa, New Jersey, Buffalo, and Philadelphia are also going to weigh their options. For example, the Senators and Sabres can move their picks for immediate help, while the Flyers may try to move up. I would absolutely love to see Philly moving up in this draft. They currently have the 12th overall pick, but even if it's just to like number 8 to Seattle, what if they're going for somebody specific? Maybe if Anton Silayev falls outside the top 4, they go for him, or it could be somebody else like an Artyom Levshunov, or if they want to get an Ivan Demidov, or if they want to go after a Iginla or a Cayden Lindstrom or Cole Eiserman, securing a spot by moving up in the draft. Philly would be fascinating, and I really hope they get creative. I mean, Danny Briere has obviously gone for a lot of talent over these last couple of drafts, which I think is a good thing for the Flyers, and maybe they prioritize that again in this draft as well, moving up in a big way. That, to me, could be huge for them. Maybe a player like Travis Konecny could be in play. Maybe that's where we see a Travis Konecny trade and Philly moving up in a major way. Maybe it's with a team like Anaheim. If they want to get after a player like Konecny and get him a long term, that could be an interesting fit, perhaps. With Philly potentially moving up, and with all these teams potentially wanting to go out of the top top 12, there could be a lot of movement here, and I really hope there is. We get some more notes, though, saying for the Habs, we know Arber's Xhekaj is pretty much off the table, being reported that teams have continued to ask about him, including the Calgary Flames, but Kent Hughes isn't interested in moving him. I'm sure he'll change his mind if someone is willing to overpay, but for now, Xhekaj is part of Montreal's plans moving forward. So even though there could be some D available, it seems like Xhekaj, for the most part, is off the table. We can all debate over the actual on-ice value he provides, but man, this guy is a rock star, and it would just feel weird to have him anywhere else other than Montreal. Of already how much of a fan favorite he is, I think he's somebody that can provide a lot of value as a bottom pair D in the future as a physical guy, not somebody that's going to overwhelm you value-wise, which I think is something where you should be still listening in offers, but we'll see. It depends on what's out there, but for right now, we know that Kent Hughes will be sticking with Xhekaj, and it'll be interesting to see where he plays in the future. As a bottom pair D, though, I think you could have a lot worse options, especially once he's able to hit his prime there. Some more notes on another D, though, are interesting here, saying I do not imagine the Canadiens have much of an appetite to move the likes of Cayden, Lane Hudson, Mews, or David Reinbacher. That's pretty obvious and pretty expected, barring a blockbuster. But I wonder about the likes of Jordan Harris, Jaden Struble, Justin Barron, Mattias Norlinder, and Adam Engstrom. The Habs are telling teams like they prefer to keep them, but A, they can't keep everybody, and it's called negotiating, and you have to give to get. I'm curious what Hughes has up his sleeve, and that makes complete sense. I mean, you obviously got the top end of the defensive prospects there. I would say Mews may be the most likely among those core four to be traded in the future, but still, those guys are most likely going to be staying, especially Reinbacher, Hudson, Guhle. There's no way they deal those guys. But then you have maybe that second tier of defensive prospects, and Harris, Struble, Barron, Norlinder, Engstrom is definitely among them. Among the guys I would be most maybe likely to move or wanting to move by Montreal, Justin Barron would absolutely be number one in my opinion. He's somebody that has a lot of holes, even though he does bring some good offensive traits. Mattias Norlinder also is somebody that's kind of regressed in ways over the past couple of years after having some big play after he was drafted. Adam Engstrom, though, is somebody that I would want to keep if I'm Montreal. He's somebody that's really exploded in the SHL since being drafted, and I also still think Jaden Struble can provide a lot of value. He's somebody that's been inconsistent at times, and sometimes the brain can be a little bit lackluster, but that's somebody that still has a lot of talent in my opinion, and still has a lot of good physical traits too. There is going to be a really interesting offseason here for Montreal, and considering the defensive prospects they have, I'm expecting at least one of these guys to be moved for some type of help, maybe for a pick, something. I don't think any of these guys are going to be completely locked in this offseason, which is a good thing. Montreal needs to keep their cards open, and they definitely will. Now, they go on to say the Habs have cap space to play with, and that could help them this summer. They've been linked to Anaheim's Trevor Zegras, of course, who prefers the spotlight, and long-term play in Orange County seems unlikely. Ottawa has been willing to listen on Josh Norris, apparently, who has been dealt multiple injuries of late, but I can't see this ends in Habs completing a major trade. Me neither. Minnesota's Marco Rossi is on the trade block and aligns with Montreal's past draft time moves. Will the eventual new GM in Columbus considering moving Cole Sillinger or Kent Johnson? To me, Marco Rossi is an interesting one. He's somebody that if you told me he was on the trade block initially a couple months ago, I would have thought you were crazy, but apparently Minnesota is actually considering it and is actually looking at Rossi as potential trade piece. I don't know why they're doing it, but it seems like they are. And boy, I'll tell you, if you're going to move a D, Marco Rossi would be an incredible addition to make, especially if you're going to go after a bigger forward like Cayden Lindstrom. Adding in a player like Marco Rossi would make things so interesting for that forward group. It would add some juice to that lineup, some skill, and some really good in-tight play that I think they could really use. And even though he's on the smaller side of things, again, if you're able to balance that with an addition of Cayden Lindstrom in the future, I think it's fine. Rossi does play bigger than he is, and to me, that aids to a lot of success already at the NHL level. If you're able to get a player like that, you get him if you can. We have some more tidbits, though, on what they could end up dealing, saying Montreal will explore its options, both at center and the wing. They want to add another goal scorer somehow, and they have the asset pool to make it happen. Hughes will also dangle the lights of Christian Dvorak, David Savard, and Armia this summer. All three are entering expiring contracts, and I hope so. I mean, we've been talking about all three of these guys for so long now, especially in Armia's case, in Savard's case, two guys that were guys that maybe could have been dealt at the deadline, but obviously weren't and kept as Montreal Canadiens. I think the Habs might want to decide what they want to do in the defense in the future, because you can't keep all of these guys. There's already a major logjam with the Habs defense, and that's with players like Harris, Matheson, Savard, and all these guys they haven't traded still on that defense. And to me, it's becoming a major problem. Maybe not something that is a awful problem to have. Having too many good D is something that's a good thing, but it creates problems within the lineup and creates problems developmentally where guys can't get the time they need to fully succeed. I think most likely it'll be David Savard that ends up getting dealt, but man, it is going to be a wild offseason for the defense, and it could look a lot different as soon as next October. But like we talked about before, to me, if they are going to make a big addition, if they're going to go after somebody in the trade market, make it on the wing, especially if you're going to go for a Kane Lindstrom in this draft. To me, they could really use a big-time left wing for the future. They could use just somebody to have some reinforcements behind Caulfield and Slafkovsky, who have really had to carry the offensive load completely over the past couple of years. Now, this is just a little bit of a mock-up of what the Habs' future could look like in the future if they were to trade for a top 6 left wing, and it would really bring a lot of diversity to the lineup. You could even have Caulfield on the second line if you really wanted to, if that fits more in the future. But right now, you have Caulfield, Suzuki, Slafkovsky, so whoever they end up trading for, whether it's a Trevor Zegras or somebody else, potentially with Kane Lindstrom on the second line center spot and Alex Newhook as well fitting in. You could have a third line of Wad, Duck, and Meshar, which I think would be really interesting. And then the fourth line, I think Beck is really the only one that's penciled in really in the future. You could have Alex Tuck fitting into that lineup, Riley Kidney perhaps. You could have, of course, the Florian Jack guy. You could have just so many options. There's a lot of options in that fourth line. I don't think it's really all that productive to split hairs over it, but I think that top 9 could be really interesting. I think they're just one really solid piece away from being so much better in the future. On top of what they could draft in this year's draft, obviously it could be a lot different if they go for a Iginla perhaps, and that could be a big fix on that right wing. But if they are going to go for another big time center, then that could be the fix there. Or they could just go for Iginla, then you'd have Suzuki, Doc, and Newhook as your top 3 centers. I think there's still win-wins almost in every single situation here, but Lindstrom especially could be fascinating, and a second line center behind Suzuki, that could be dangerous. But man, this Habs draft is setting up to be an absolutely crazy one, and right now there's so many options for them to go for in this offseason. So much that they could do, so many moves they could make, but I want to know in the comments down below, what do you see them doing? What do you want to see them do at this year's draft in the offseason? What trades do you think they'll make? Who do you think they'll go for? Who do you think they'll draft? I would love to know all your thoughts down below. Of course, make sure you share a video with all the Habs fans you guys know online to get the news out to them, and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell if you guys enjoyed today's video and want to see more breakdowns just like it. Really, the Habs are going to be one of the most fascinating teams in this offseason, and I cannot wait to see what they end up doing. Of course, if you guys want to see more like it, make sure you click on this card for all my hockey prospect talk, a lot of good stuff there, and I will see you in the next one. I hope you have a great hockey day, and goodbye.